This is a really exciting time on the campus of the University of Tennessee. There are a lot of buildings in all sorts of stages, some being programmed, some already under construction. And I think that by the time this spate of development is done, we won't recognize the campus as we know it today. Now, most of the decisions about all these buildings are going to be made by the administration of the university and also by professionals whom they will hire to design and to consult. Engineers, architects, landscape architects, interior designers, and so on. And I think that this is the way it should be. It takes a lot of work to create a new building and to think about all the different aspects of it. And so you need people whose professional job it is to do so, who are able to give in the time. But the idea I want to leave you with here today is that users of this campus, or if you're from elsewhere, whatever campus it is you are part of, we also have a role to play in thinking about the future and in directing where it will go. It's a role that is about setting expectations and standards. It's a role of saying what is important to us and how we want the campus to be. And so I want to talk about this a little bit today, because usually setting standards for the built environment is something that is not talked about and is not usually discussed. And so people usually end up saying what their personal preference is rather than actually discussing a topic. Often people tell me, I know what I like, but I don't know what is good. So I want to talk about how we talk about what is good in the built environment. And I want to do that through talking about these changes in the campus today, and especially one of the aspects of it, of this larger, of this change in the campus. So as I mentioned before, there are many different projects being built right now. There are new residence halls. There's a vivarium that includes a frog room that I really hope to get to see one day. And each one of these buildings is a world unto itself, with its own needs, with its own users. But at the same time, they are, at least while we're here in this world and not in the virtual world, still part of the campus of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And for many years, buildings on this campus were built without any regard to other buildings. But today, the situation has changed. And there's an administrative office and a campus planning and design committee. And people are talking and advising the chancellor on how to create a whole that is more than the sum of its parts. Now, the advantage of making a cohesive campus is, there are many advantages to it. Let me pull out one in particular. One of the hallmarks of a great academic institution is its collegiality. Now, this is not just a matter of prime and team spirit and big orange and so on. What it is, in today's technically corrected world, which we were just hearing about, is something that there's still something that the virtual world can't offer us. Yes, we can connect with people from almost anywhere with very, very little. But those connections are almost always planned in advance. What a physical institution like this university gives us is the opportunity for random conversations, for that transdisciplinarity that was mentioned before, for the opportunity for new ideas and breakthroughs that we don't go looking through but just come at us in an unsuspecting way. And often these are the ones that lead to breakthroughs that a top 25 research university can be really proud of. So if you're thinking about this goal, it of course makes sense to try and get people to feel connected to the campus and connected to other people on campus, even if they don't work with them. And then it makes a lot of sense to try and have a relatively cohesive campus where people feel this feeling of connectedness. So this is the topic I want to talk about briefly. What does it mean in terms of architecture and design? How do you create a cohesive whole? What do you use as a unifying element? And I only have time to discuss two approaches. One of them is based on visual and symbolic cues. You might call it using style, architectural style, and I will start with that. The second one emphasizes, rather than style, emphasizes haptic experiences. I'll call this the placemaking approach, which is what I started here with moving the table. So the first one taps into our cognitive and mental abilities. We pay attention to repetitions. We notice when things are the same as other things. The second one stems from the fact that as humans, we walk and we talk and we smell and we hear, and that all of these things create associations in our minds, and we later think of places and connect them with particular ideas or emotions. Now, I don't want for a moment to suggest that you have to have one or the other. On the contrary, in an ideal world, we'd have them both. The reason I'm talking about them today is that very often in the real world, and as is happening here on campus today, these two approaches compete for attention, for resources, for ideas. And so I think it's important for us as users to know what these ideas are. And I hope to show you that it's the second one that is based on our haptic experiences and on the way we behave in the built environment, rather than just the one that works on how we see and how we understand symbols, that I think will get us to where we need to go on this campus. But let me talk about them both. And begin by talking just briefly about styles, which of course have a long history in architectural and landscape architecture history. And if we look back in time, styles usually developed in response to several different forces. Cultural and religious traditions, the relative power of different groups and their need to actually express that power, technical material issues, whether there was more wood or more marble, and climatic considerations as well, another important thing. But the interesting thing about style is that with the Renaissance, we start having yet another reason for people to choose style, at least here in the West. In other places in the world, the Renaissance is not the time when this happens. And that is the reason of conscious choice. So what happened in the 15th and 16th centuries was that architects and rulers in Italy made a deliberate decision to emulate the architecture of the Roman Empire. And they created a style out of this, which we call the Renaissance, or classical is another word that's sometimes used. And then rulers and architects in other countries, especially France, made a conscious decision to choose to adopt this style as their own. And so the choice and using style to represent things rather than just a response to factors that are outside of people's decision is part of what has created styles in the past. And this became even more important with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Because with new technologies and new materials, people had the opportunity to build almost anything they wanted. They were no longer tied to material and technological considerations the way they were before. But the flip side is that also meant that architects and other people and clients were free to choose whatever style they wanted. And in the 19th century, people celebrated this choice. In fact, there was an ongoing, very long conversation, both in Western Europe and here in the United States, about what style to choose. And what people thought was that each one of these styles, especially the well-defined ones, represented a really specific time in history when a civilization reached a fusion of culture and art and technology that was then given form by architects and artists, or at least by the great architects and artists. And in the 19th century, several such epochs were identified, specifically the Greek, the Roman, and the Gothic. And that's why we have Neo-Greek or Neoclassical, Neo-Roman, which is also often referred to as Neoclassical, and Neo-Gothic, which I'll get back to in just a moment, as part of the vocabulary that people used for buildings. Now, in this process of discussing styles, one thing that happened was that the styles were formalized to such an extent that people could actually copy them easily. The other thing that happened, and I think this is important for what I want to get at today, is that each one of these styles was connected with a series of virtues. So universal justice, law and order, democracy, community spirit, national identity, religious identity. Each one of these was connected with different styles, and of course by different people in different ways. And architects and others believed strongly that if you used the right style, you could evoke the right emotions. So if you built a courthouse, for example, in a neoclassical or neo-Roman style, you would evoke justice. People would, there would be more justice there. Or if you designed a church in a neo-Gothic style, it would inspire people to create an ideal Christian society, and so on. Now, all of this happened here on campus as well. This was done actually only in the early 20th century, when this building Ayers Hall replaced the old college, which was the first building here on campus, which, by the way, was Neo-Greek in style. So this building was built in the early 20th century, and it's actually technically Elizabethan, in other words, late medieval in style, but it's almost always referred to as collegiate Gothic, which is sort of one version, or at least that's the way the term is usually used, of Neo-Gothic architecture. And the decision to build this building in this style and to work through the details, you can see here above the doorway and up on the tower, to work through the details was a choice made very specifically for the time. We think of the university today as a big institution, but in the early 20th century, it was still a relatively small college, liberal arts college, that had already begun expanding as a land-grant institute, but was still a bit uneasy about the balance between the two. And so one of the reasons to choose this sort of style, which of course harks to Oxford and Cambridge, and to other Ivy League campuses and other campuses in the United States, was to emphasize the historical roots of the campus, to emphasize sort of where it came from, and not only where it was, and more than where it was going. Now this building, Ayers Hall, and the collegiate Gothic idea are still used as a model for buildings on campus today. This, for example, is the Haslam Business School, and it is just one example of how elements from an older collegiate Gothic building that was torn down so as to build this building, you can see here these entrances, and then new elements such as these gables and these very vertical windows, the general verticality, the use of brick together with cast concrete sort of trim and so on. All these have become and are the standard now here on campus for new buildings. And you can see here this is an image of Strong Hall, which you may not know, but is being demolished now, so a 9-story lab building will come in. You can see here that in Strong Hall, and this is true of most buildings on campus, that the building itself is built with new materials, this in concrete in this particular case, and that the Neo-Gothic is really just a veneer. And this has been true is true here and has been true for many buildings since the 19th century. Now, if I go back to my question that I started with of creating a cohesive campus, I think it's really easy to see why this is a good idea. You adopt a style and you use it repeatedly. That means that we have a set of materials, a set of shapes, a set of proportions. People see this continuity and repetition and experience the campus as a whole. Using such a style on many different buildings, as is being done today on campus, also helps mask differences between buildings. So a residential hall can look, or at least the elements on the residential hall, can look like the elements on a lab building or on the building for the Humanities Center or anything else. I think this is a very powerful message. The thing I want to put to you is this the message we really want to send? Do we really want our lab buildings to be confused with residential halls? Do we want to mask the differences between different buildings and between different uses? Or do we want to celebrate the diversity that this university has grown into? From my perspective as an architect and an architectural historian, I look at the way the university has updated its image in print and digital media, and I'm surprised by the fact that in architecture, we're still using a message that was developed almost 100 years ago. I think that we have so many new cutting-edge sciences and technologies, and for me to see them in buildings that look like they were built in the 19th century is very, very jarring. Now, this is not to say that never use collegiate Gothic. On the contrary, Gothic and collegiate Gothic architecture has long been the backdrop for those collegial interactions, which I myself said is one of the most important things on the university. But the difference is that in cases like that, it wasn't just the style that was used. It wasn't just gables or arches or things like that, but rather the style was used in consort with other aspects what I mentioned before, the aspects of placemaking, the idea of referring to people's experiences and behavior, and not just their ability to read something like an arched, a pointed arch and think, oh yes, this means collegiality and I need to talk to people who are walking my way. So here's actually it's very minimal, but this to me is a very successful piece of collegiate Gothic on our campus. You can see here that the pointed arches, first of all, are at eye level. They're not up on 9 stories where I can only see them from far away. They're where I actually am. And even more importantly, you can see here, if you're not familiar with this space, that there's another set of arches right behind it. So there's a little space here. And on one side is an entrance to a building, or one of the entrances, I should say. And on the other, there's a bench. And you can sit there. And if it's raining or snowing, or if the sun is very hot, you can rest in the shade. But even more than that, if you walk into this space, which I just showed you, which I did when I was taking this photograph, you find that there's another set of arches on the other side of the building, and that enclosed between them is a small outdoor space. It's not very beautiful, but it has a wonderful tree, and in the spring it flowers in these fantastic pink flowers. And I walk through here often. This is the way to the coffee shop from where I work. And almost every time I've walked by, there have been people standing here and talking the way they are in this image. And you can tell that some of them are just walking by and they met someone else. I've often heard lots of different languages here. For some reason, which I really need to find out, Arabic is often the language that people are speaking here. What this means is that people who may, I don't want to assume anything about them, but there's a good chance grew up without any knowledge of collegiate Gothic or of Gothic architecture, are using this space exactly the way it was intended. So the point I want to make is that creating spaces, or more importantly, creating places where people can behave in certain ways, and paying attention to these things is something that can reap rich rewards. Now, what does that mean for us as users? Well, I think it means that we need to demand that the public spaces on campus be given the same attention that the buildings are. And that means, first of all, let's just think about the spaces between the buildings. So let me show you an example. This is the new residence hall that is being built on Andy Holt Avenue, which you can see here, which will be in the future the continuation of the mall. And you can see here that in terms of style, it is following the collegiate Gothic as I showed you before. But let's turn our attention for just a moment and just look at the public spaces that this building offers. Well, you can see here that there's a small terrace above the entrance, which the residents and their guests will be able to use. And, well, that's it. Now, suppose instead we shifted our focus. This is just walking a little bit backwards. And we saw the project not just as the building itself, but also this space in front of it. And I'll even allow you to take this parking lot, even though I park here, take this parking lot away. And imagine that this open space included places to sit down, places to hang out, places to study and discuss scholarship, maybe an outdoor cafe. There's a hot dog stand there. So I bet people would use the tables there. I'll let your imagination continue this thought. I think we would get a much richer campus if we shifted our attention this way. Another thing is to think that it's not just a matter of landscaping. It's not just a matter of adding benches under a tree, though that's important. Buildings can be designed so that they offer public spaces for the campus. In fact, one of the buildings that does this best is not collegiate Gothic. It's not even faced in brick. This is the Art and Architecture building, and I'm guessing that many of you find it very, very ugly, and that's absolutely fine. And you may also not appreciate the message about systems and rationality and so on that are embedded in it. That's fine too. Go with me for just a moment beyond style. And just look at the way this building offers an outdoor public space by having this extension over the route from Lake Loudon towards the library. This is a place where people can meet and where you can interact with the building even if you're not going to go into it. And people often do so. I know, because one of the classrooms I teach in is right here, and I hear them. But it's actually really nice. It's a feeling that we're in a class, but there are other things going on campus as well. When the brass band was there, that was a bit of a problem. More than that, public spaces, I've been talking about them as outdoor public spaces, but they don't have to be. If you go into the Art and Architecture building, you come to this atrium. And it's used constantly by people from all over campus. I see people studying here many other topics besides art and architecture. There's a group that comes here every evening to practice breakdancing. And the other day, the atrium was filled with little kids having lunch. They were probably on their way to the museum or the library, I'm not sure. But it was really nice to just feel that the university was fulfilling its role as of community outreach through the fact that the kids could use this building. And on top of all this, when visitors, I don't really consider them visitors, just people who don't usually use the building, come into art and architecture, they have an opportunity to learn things that they may not know about, whether it's about the Department of Art or the College of Architecture and Design. And it doesn't take very long. It's just a few minutes, because you're there anyway using the building. So what I hope that I've shown you is that the atrium of the Art and Architecture is a very flexible public space, a place where people can come together either by design or by chance. And that it's a space that enhances the academic life in allowing those random interactions. And this, to me, is a space for a campus of the 21st century. Exactly because the world is becoming more virtual, we have to take what a physical institution can give us and give that attention and make our spaces serve that use and that function. So imagine for a moment that all buildings on campus were connected with a pedestrian walkway. And anyone who was walking along that could find places such as this, or if they really didn't like the style, one that is collegiate Gothic. I think we'd have a much more cohesive campus, or at least we'd have a cohesive community campus. And I think that that's what matters. And I think that thinking about those spaces would bring buildings together, no matter what their style, their use, their size, all these different things. We'd think about them as part of something whole. Now, the design of public spaces is not a matter of chance. It's not about someone bringing their hammock. The way that styles were conceptualized by architects and researchers and historians in the 19th century, in the same way, people's responses to the built environment, how people understand environments, comprehend them, how they make choices about what to use and what not to use, has been studied quite in great depth as well. We have a lot of terms that have been used to discuss some of these findings. Wayfinding, territoriality, walkability. They're often words that kind of mix things together. And my least favorite, but one of the most popular right now, is activated space. The point is only that there are these terms, and they have been used. Architects and researchers have also studied the spiritual aspects of architecture. And there's a lot of information about how to create spaces that inspire people and move them. Because sometimes that is a very important part of what we should be doing with buildings. What I want to suggest to you is that this research, together with the creativity of architects and landscape architects, is a really rich basis from which we can start thinking about making places on this campus and transform it into a place for living and learning, and not just a symbol of a place for living and learning. Now, of course, nothing that I am suggesting to you today is new. On the contrary, many of the ideas I've told you about are part of the master plan for the campus, and they're part of designs for particular buildings. So why am I using this time for this? Because from my experience as an architect and from my studies in architectural historians, plans are not enough. In today's hectic world, it's really easy to replace public spaces with parking lots. Happens a lot. It's really easy to place the entrance to a new building where it happened to be convenient at that moment and not think about how people will walk there. With limited resources, and unfortunately we will always be building with limited resources, that's the way of the world, It's simply much easier to put a gable on a building than to design, build, and maintain an outdoor space. And I think this is what we need to guard against. We can celebrate the places we already have. We can help develop new places. And we can hold ourselves and the designers of our environment, who are changing it every day as we speak, and through public meetings and through active discussions and so on, into something where hanging a hammock is a given and not something that happens by chance. And I think that we need to care about this because it really isn't just about our everyday enjoyment or our ability to take a break between classes, but it is about the future of this university and of these random collegial connections which give the need and give the reason for having a university in the first place. Thank you.